Hey everybody, Felix Staffelbaker here. Have you ever wondered where the peace sign came from, specifically the crow's foot with the middle finger? Well, if you look at historical evidence, even though the 60s and things had the peace sign co-opted and taken over by other groups, you can look at the historical context and we go back to the Dark Ages, the medieval times, a period where even God wasn't talking to man. And we see that among a few decisive things, things turned around. And there was the invention of the printing press, where the Bible, being the first book printed, proliferated around the world, that the church at the time was the only person who could interpret the word for you and tell you what you could do. Now it basically opened it up for everybody to see. In the same way, we look at the 100 Years' War in between the English and the French, and specifically a decisive battle, something that was a huge turn in the war, or in the victory, was the Battle of Agincourt. And this was a significant battle in 1415 during the 100 Years' War, and it resulted in the French, the French losing. The English army, led by King Henry V, famously achieved victory in spite of numerical superiority of his opponent. The battle repeated other English successes in the 100 Years' War, and there was many battles that were won, making it possible for the subsequent conquest of Normandy, leading to the Treaty of Troyes. All these different things. It named Henry V the heir to the French crown. And the 100 Years' War was a discontinuous conflict between England and France that spanned 2 centuries. At issue was the question of legitimate succession to the French crown, as well as the ownership of several French territories. The struggle began in 1337, when the King Edward III of England claimed the title King of France over Philip VI and invaded Flanders. It continued as a series of battles, sieges, and disputes throughout the 14th century, with both the French and the English variously taking advantage. When Henry V acceded to the English throne in 1413, there had been a long hiatus in the fighting. A truce had been formally declared in 1396 that was meant to last 28 years, sealed by the marriage of the French King Charles VI's daughter to King Richard II of England. However, the need to reassert his authority at home, as well as his own ambition and a sense of justice, led Henry V to renew English claims in France. England had been fraught with political discord since Henry IV of the House of Lancaster, father of Henry V, had usurped the throne from Richard II in 1399. Since there had been tension between the nobility and the royal house, widespread lawlessness throughout the kingdom, and several attempts on Henry V's life. The situation in England, coupled with the fact that France was weakened by its own political crisis, the insanity of Charles VI, resulted in a fight for power among the nobility, making an ideal moment for Henry to press his claims. When the French rejected Henry's substantial territory demands, he arrived in Normandy in August 1415 with a force of 12,000 men and laid siege to the city of Harfleur. The city capitulated within 6 weeks, but the siege was costly. It lasted longer than Henry anticipated, and his numbers were significantly diminished as a result of casualties, desertion, and diseases. When he departed he had a force of 1,000 knights and men at arms and 5,000 archers. Unable to cross the Somme River because of the French defenses, he was forced to take a detour inland and cross further upstream. Delayed allowed a large French force led by Constable Charles d'Albert and the Marshal Jean Lemage, called Buchenat, to intercept him near the village of Agincourt. On October 24th, the English were not in an ideal condition to fight a battle. They had been weakened by the siege of Harfleur and had marched over 200 miles, and many of them were suffering from dysentery. By most contemporary accounts, the French military was also significantly larger than the English, though the exact degree of their numerical superiority is disputed. Common estimates place the English army about 6,000, while the French army probably consisted of 20,000 to 30,000 men. This suggests that French could have outnumbered the English 5-1. At least one scholar puts that the French army had no more than 12,000, which indicated the English were outnumbered 2-1 at the very least. It seems clear that the English were at a numerical disadvantage. Early in the morning of October 25th, 1415, Henry positioned his army for a battle on a recently plowed field bounded by woods. His men-at-arms were stationed at the center, flanked by wedges of archers who carried longbows that had an effective range of 250 yards. The terrain favored Henry's army and disadvantaged its opponent, and it reduced the numerical advantage of the French by narrowing the front. This would prevent maneuvers that might overwhelm English ranks. Fighting commenced at 11 a.m. The English brought their longbows within killing range of first line of French knights advanced, led by cavalry. The field that the French had to cross to meet their enemy was muddy after a week of rain and slowed their progress, during which time they endured casualties from English arrows. When the French line reached the English front, the cavalry were unable to overwhelm the archers, who had driven sharpened stakes into the ground at an angle before themselves. This was an innovation technique the English had not used in battles of Crécy and Poitiers. Eventually, the archers abandoned their longbows and began fighting hand-to-hand and axes alongside the men-at-arms. The next line of French knights that poured in from themselves tightly packed and found themselves so tightly that they were unable to use their weapon effectively, and the tide of the battle began to turn towards the English. As the English were collecting prisoners, a band of French peasants, led by local noblemen, began plundering Henry's baggage behind the lines. Thinking it was attacked from the rear, Henry had the French nobles he was holding prisoner killed. The third line of the French army, recoiling at the pile of corpses before them, were unable to make an effective charge, then were massacred swiftly. The battle probably lasted no longer than 3 hours, as perhaps short as a half hour, according to some estimates. While the precise number of casualties is unknown, it is estimated the English lost 400 and the French lost 6,000, many who were noblemen. After the victory, Henry continued to march towards Calais and arrived back in England in November to an outpouring of nation nostalgic sentiment. Contemporary accounts describe the triumphant pageantry in which the king was received in London on November 23rd. The elaborate displays and choirs attending his passage to St. Paul's Cathedral, the Agincourt Carol, dating from around that time and possibly written for Henry's reception in London, is a resounding celebration of the might of the English. The effect of the victory on national morale was powerful. Agincourt came on the back of the half-century of the military failure that gave English success and repeated victories. Moreover, this outcome, Henry V strengthened his position in his own kingdom, legitimized his claim to the crown, which had been under threat after his ascension, Most importantly, the battle was a significant military blow to the French and paved the way for further English conquests. And it ended up leading to the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. But something that I found so interesting going through some of the stuff that's in this book is that the French were telling the Englishmen who had the longbows, when we capture you, we're going to cut off your middle fingers and we're going to not allow you to be able to use those longbows anymore. And when the English finally defeated the French, they ended up holding up and waving their middle fingers at the French, saying, "You didn't get us yet. You haven't killed us. We're still here. We're still fighting." And I see Eos as our Agincourt. This is our battle. We're fighting for the spirit of humanity. We're fighting for the DNA of our civilization, and we are positioning ourselves through assets like Eos, which is hopping onto the backs of these billionaires and people in absolute power to be able to say, hey, look, you didn't kill us yet. We've still got our weapons. We've still got our fighting spirit. We've still got our ability with our bodies to fight back in ways that will disrupt you, will cause turmoil in your mind, will keep you up at night. And there's no violence involved, but the point is, Eos is our Agincourt. It's our way to say, hey, you didn't kill us. We've still got life. We've still got fight. We're in this battle for humanity. We're in the arena. We're here promoting Eos. We're showing the world that there's a technology getting ready to take over the whole world and that we're positioned, we're prepared. We want everybody to get involved. And so I just found that absolutely fascinating, and that absolutely turned the tides of human civilization. That battle between that and the printing press, being able to deluge the word of the Lord into the world, out of that sprang the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the great thinkers of our time that we revere in schools and are taught about to love. All that came about because people weren't willing to give in. They stood their ground when all the odds were totally against them. There was no win in sight. And then at the end, they had that sweet victory where they could hold up their hand and show that they didn't lose. They may have lost some people along the way, and they may have endured some of the hardest things that they ever had to endure in their life, but they weren't killed, and they didn't lose. And so I just want to encourage people. It might seem like we're at a huge loss with Eos, that it's taken forever, that things are going not as planned, but that's insignificantly wrong. In this battle, there's always tugs and pulls, and it might look like Eos is having the crunch of 2019, where all the transactions were getting blocked up, and then people left. Well, that's just a small little battle that was overtaken really quickly. So I just want to point that out, that Eos is our Agincourt, and that we're still in the fight. Use the symbolism to be able to encourage yourself and to be able to look towards the better things that are coming, because they're coming quickly. So I just want to put that out there. Stoffel Baker out.